we are on to variable costing. So there's a difference between the variable costing and the absorption costing methods, and this exercise is going to explain and exhibit the differences. So as per usual, you are given this very same data for Aztek Skateboards, and what I have done is actually gone ahead and indicated the variable as well as the variable manufacturing costs, as well as the fixed manufacturing costs, and the variable selling and the fixed selling. So I've given you a little bit of a jump start here just to kind of make things easier. And the only thing I wanted to point out is that in the previous exercise, we had already determined what the predetermined overhead rate was, and that is the rate that we're going to use. So we'll be ignoring the miscellaneous screws as well as some of the other manufacturing overhead, but it is calculated and included in this 2519 right here. So what we're going to do for this one is simply copy down the information that's above. So under the variable costs, then we have some direct materials. So for the direct materials, you know that for these skateboards we have quite a few, and these are the direct materials for that. So the direct labor was found up here under the direct labor, and the variable manufacturing overhead, as I mentioned before, is going to be that predetermined overhead rate. So now all we have to do is simply add up all of these, if I could write my function right, all of these costs right here to come up with the total variable cost. All right, now here's kind of a new twist. We haven't talked about this yet, but this chapter we're going to introduce it is, what about that fixed manufacturing overhead? We have normally just included that sort of below the line. We haven't included that in the contribution margin as we've been analyzing things. And now we're going to take a little bit different twist on this. So let's go ahead and find our fixed manufacturing overhead. And for that, we used the supervisor's salary as well as the rent for our manufacturing unit. So that was our total fixed manufacturing overhead. Okay, for the variable selling and administrative, we have that commission, which we're going to find right over here. There's our commission. All right, and I had also transferred it over to the variable selling, so I didn't have to look so hard. And then the fixed selling administrative is the the fixed selling and administrative is going to be our CEO's salary, as well as the headquarters rent, as well as the headquarters taxes and the headquarters insurance. So I'm going to just go ahead and add all of that up. That'll be this, this, and this. Okay, so there we have our total. Okay, for this problem, we have been given the number of units, number of skateboards in our case, that were manufactured during the first year, and the number of sold. So you can see that there's a difference between how many we manufactured and how many sold. In year 2, so you can see that we manufactured more than we sold. In year 2, we've actually manufactured less than what we've sold. So you're going to have to think to yourself, well, there was some ending inventory from last year, so we're going to sell that inventory plus what we manufactured this year. And there's a reason I'm doing this, and you're going to find out the beauty of all this in a minute. So the first step is to compute the ending inventory. This is fairly simple because the units in my beginning inventory were simply what I started with. Since I'm a brand new company, I don't have any beginning inventory. The number produced is just what was given up here, and then the units sold is what I told you we sold down here. So then obviously the ending units would be what I produced less what I sold. Okay, for year 2, well, what do we start with? We start with inventory that was left over from last year. How much did we produce? Well, I told you we produced 2,000 and we sold 2,500. So how many do we have in ending inventory? Well, we started with 500, we produced 2,000 more, but we sold 25. So we're going to wind up with no ending inventory. Is this realistic? No, of course not, but it is a very good explanation of the difference between variable and absorption costing, so I took a little liberty on this question, and that's the way that goes. All right, so now what we're going to do is compute the unit product cost using the absorption costing, and here we go. So remember, you and I decided that it was the direct materials were here, the direct labor was here, and the manufacturing overhead was here. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting. I'm going to take the example that we had the fixed manufacturing overhead, which was the 5250, and we're going to divide that by how many units were produced during the year. So here we go. So here's my $5,250 divided by how many units I produced, and that's going to give me that amount. And the total for the unit absorption costing is going to be the sum of all of these right here. I did make one slight error. I wanted to go back, but I'm not going to restart this entire recording just to show you, but I did up here forget the $200 in warehouse utilities, so the correct fixed manufacturing overhead is $54.50, which I have then taken the $54.50, which is in cell C36, and divided it by how many we produced, which was 3,000. So I just wanted to make that clarification so you didn't go crazy. So the second part is to go down here and create an absorption costing income statement for the first year. So remember how many we sold, which was the 2,500. We're going to multiply that times our sales price, which was given up here. And then we can see that our cost of goods sold will be our absorption unit costing times how many we sold. Okay, that doesn't look too pretty, so let's go ahead and put that in a dollar format. Alrighty, and that one should also be in a similar dollar format so we can see what's going on. Then our gross margin is going to be the sales less the cost of goods sold, and then we have our variable selling and administrative. So what we're going to do for our variable is we remembered that that was the $10 per unit times how many we sold, which was the 2,500, and then our fixed is obviously fixed, so that doesn't change, so there we have it. And there's my net operating income of my gross margin less my selling and administrative, both variable as well as fixed. And I am going to change those all to a dollar amount so everything looks right with the right amount of decimal points. Okay, let's keep moving on down. So for year 2, the direct materials have not changed, so we're still going to use that $57.50. Our direct labor again is still the same, and our predetermined overhead rate is what we're going to use here. So my variable, you'll notice, does not, this is what we've been talking about all along, so this should look very familiar because the difference is that fixed manufacturing overhead is something new that we're introducing in this particular chapter. And you can see that the per unit fixed manufacturing, or the fixed manufacturing overhead, gets calculated on a per basis, and that is then included in the unit product cost. So that kind of turns everything we've learned so far on its ear. But let's keep going and see what happens. So again, we're asked to make an income statement, but this time in the variable costing income statement format, which means that it's a contribution format. So sales, of course, won't change. We would be surprised if they did. But in this case, we've still got the same 2,500 that we have sold, and we've still sold them for $215. So you can see that the sales figures are the same. And then what about these variable costs? So here is my variable costing unit product cost times how many I sold, and there I have it. And then here's my variable selling and administrative. Okay, so that is the $10 times how many I've sold. And now I've got a contribution margin. So this should feel like home to you because we've been talking about this all along. So there's my contribution margin. Now I'm going to take my fixed expenses, and in this case, because it's variable costing, not absorption costing, we're going to take the entire fixed manufacturing overhead. So let's go find that number. What was my fixed manufacturing overhead for the year? Here it goes, and I'm going to expense the whole thing. And then my fixed selling and administrative was up here. That is no different than always. I'm going to put that in the same dollar amount so you can see. And then my net operating income is going to be my contribution margin less my fixed expenses. So there you have it. So my net income under, I'm going to bold this because you can see under the contribution, or excuse me, under absorption costing, it's 255. Under the variable costing, it's 254. I sold the same amount of items, I manufactured the same amount of items, but I've got a different net income. So I call this the truing it up time. So let's take a look and see what's my net income under the absorption costing, excuse me, less what my net income is under my variable costing. And you can see the difference is $908. Holy cow, why is it $908? Well, how much do we have in our ending inventory? We have 500 in our ending inventory, and we're going to multiply that times, don't get too freaked out here, but we're going to multiply that times that fixed manufacturing overhead, because that's really the only difference between the absorption costing and the variable costing, is that here we're holding out some of the fixed manufacturing overhead. We're not expensing the whole thing. And you can see that that is the same difference. So I'm $908.33 off in the difference between the net incomes, and that's because I have $908.33 left in my ending inventory, which is those 500 units, and those 500 units have an additional $1.82 tacked onto them because that fixed manufacturing overhead didn't get completely expensed during year one. So I'm going to let you go ahead and do the same thing for year two, and then you're going to find that that $908 eventually gets flushed out in year two.